Well, good afternoon, everybody, and we wish you a beautiful Monday here on the day before Earth Day. Live Eco Style is celebrating tomorrow a big day that we've been profoundly involved with for over 15 years. And basically, we're going to have another show that we're going to be doing called Coffee and Tidbits. But right now, very, very exciting to have another week that I'm spending with Robert Mills coming from California, because this is things people believe that just ain't so. And where Robert sits and he's going to unravel things that you might see on TV, read in the newspapers, hear on your street corner, or listen to AM radio. Sometimes there's more fiction over facts, but Robert is an esteemed retired attorney, consumer advocate, a mountain climber, world traveler, gives all kinds of great knowledge and ideas through tours that he guides in San Francisco. And great grandfather. I don't know if you're a great grandfather, but you're a wonderful grandfather. I know that, a wonderful husband, and got a lot of travel coming up. Isn't that right, Robert?
I got 10 trips coming up in the next 3 months.
Good
It's,
Lord.
we're going to go to Europe. We're going to go to mountain climbing. We're going to go all over and do all kinds of fun things. And um, I look forward to sharing all that with you.
Well, we're going to have to get those daily feeds lined up because I want to sneak into your tent. Where are you going in Europe? Where are your destinations?
We're going to go to Madeira. That's this island that's off the coast of Africa that
Say it again. It sort of broke up there. What island?
Madeira.
Uh-huh.
It's called the flower pot of Europe. It's this island, mountainous island that's owned by Portugal. And it's off the coast of North Africa, way out in the ocean, out in the
Yeah.
Atlantic Ocean. And you have to go to Europe and fly back. So I'm going to fly to Madrid and turn around and fly out in the ocean and land there and spend some days there, taking my wife and my daughter and grandson. And so we're gonna go there, and another friend, and to Madeira, and then we're going to go to Portugal. And my wife and I, we've been to 63 countries, and we don't go back to places unless we really, really. Portugal just blew us away. We were there last year, and it was so much there, and it was so fascinating that we decided to go back and see more of it. And so we're going to go back to Portugal, go all over and do all kinds of fun things in Portugal. Portugal's an incredible country. It's got so much history, and it's friendly, and it's interesting. And so we're going to have some fun. Spend 10 days in Portugal. So I'm headed to the Everglades. I've got a bunch of mountain climbing trips coming up. We might go to New York, and so it's going to be a lot of fun. Lot of fun coming up.
Well, that's what we do. We got another show we're going to have you come on because it's called Golfers Golf and Travel. So we've created enough places for Robert and family to participate and tell your story, because that's all our company is really about, living and trying to express all the good things in life. And what with this show, Robert, there's my frustration today, Robert, to get started, is that when I look at social media, I now assume everything is fake and false and AI driven, and you don't know what's there. So it gets tiring and you can't get emotionally involved in it because you don't know if it's true or not true. So all we can do is go down through bite-sized pieces. So I know you've done some research for today's show. What is the highlight of the burr under your saddle for today? What's bothering your horse, in other words?
I, I have several things that are bothering me and my horse, and I'm going to take one of them out of order based on what you just suggested. Things that are bothering me, and we have talked before about how our entire civilization was based on the work of this guy named Thales, some Greek that lived 2,600 years ago, and his contribution to humanity was, he said, you find truth through reason and evidence. And he said this in a time when everything was cults and religion and superstition and just nonsense, sort of like the social media today, right? And it became the foundation of modern science and really made the modern world today. And it's very disturbing to me to see how this foundation of reason and evidence is eroding in the United States of America. I mean, it struggled all through history. I mean, 400 years ago, Galileo read about, there was a big debate about whether the Earth went around the sun went around the Earth. And this is a pretty important thing, and people were debating it and everything. And the church says, no, the sun goes around the earth because scripture says that. It's the end of the discussion. And so along comes this famous Aristotelian philosopher and professor in Italy named Galileo. And Galileo reads about the Dutch grinding these glass and making these things on a telescope. So he makes himself a telescope. You couldn't go to Walmart then, you know. He makes himself a big telescope and he points it up in the sky and looks in it. And lo and behold, he sees a number of things, and mountains on the moon, moons of Jupiter, but he sees Venus and Mercury going through phases, you know, like the moon does, you know. And that can only happen if they're in orbits around the sun, closer to the sun than the Earth. And so he writes this paper. He actually wrote three books. He wrote this book about this, one of the most influential books in the history of the world. And he makes the case for the the geocentric, the Earth's, you know, I'm sorry, heliocentric, the sun center of the solar system, that the Earth goes around the sun. And the church says, wait, it violates scripture. And he says, but look in the telescope. I mean, you see with your own eyes. No, it violates scripture. They threw him in jail for life, okay? And they were going to execute him, but because he was, you know, knew the Pope and, you know, he managed to get it reduced to, you know, a life, you know, house arrest. And it promised that his admonition, he never teach that again or advocate it. So, you know, how far have we come in 400 years, you know, to relying on reason and evidence, you know? And so I see a lot of things that disturb me about this. Now I want to switch over here and talk for a minute about the notion of due process. Okay, this is all part of this discussion. Ever since there were societies, ever since there was civilization, been a problem with what do we do with criminals? You know, we know there are criminals, we need to prosecute them, we need to punish them, but how do we go about that in a way that doesn't convict people that are innocent and doesn't make this a tool of oppression for people in charge? This has been a problem since day one, as you can imagine, okay? I mean, and throughout civilization have been efforts. So in Western civilization, you know, way back when King John was in charge of England, he abused the nobles and he ignored what we would call today due process. And so finally, they all got together and they grabbed him and they said, listen, you can't do this anymore. We're going to have a procedure for this. So they made him sign a document in 1215 AD that we call the Magna Carta. And it required juries and, you know, and it began the foundation in England, which we had then adopted with our Constitution. And it was expanded on this notion that you can't just charge somebody, the government. You have to prove it. You have to go through a process. And this process is designed to keep innocent people from being convicted. And if you're guilty, they doesn't want to interfere with that. But it's better that, you know, an occasional innocent person go free than innocent people be convicted. So this grew and grew and grew, and it was abused. Monarchs in Europe abused it, you know, in England too. And so the notion of what due process is grew and grew and grew until finally, when these scholars and these incredible people in the United States, our founding fathers, got together in 1787 to make our Constitution, you know, they looked to these examples and they were extremely literate and read all this. And so a lot of them said, we're not going to do a Constitution unless we can have what we call the Bill of Rights, to put these rights to all of us, you and I, all of us. And this was back in the time of powdered wigs and candles at night and, you know, horses. This was 237 years ago. And they sat down, they said, we're going to have this list of things, you know, you have to confront witnesses, you have to be indicted, you have a jury of your peers, first a grand jury, then a jury of your peers. And this whole process in which you can't accuse somebody unless you go through this thing, you have to identify a crime, they have to prove each and every element of it. The state does. Everybody's presumed innocent. And to be convicted, the state has the burden of proving each and every element of a crime, a specific crime identified, beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty by 12 jurors, and first 20 grand jurors have to find there's probable cause before you can even get to the petty jury, the 12 men. And so this is designed to keep us all from being abused by government and charged with things we didn't commit, and assure the process. You have to be able to confront your accusers. You have to cross-examine them. So this heritage of ours is so vital and important, and it's so fundamental to Western civilization. And sadly, most Americans seem to be blissfully ignorant of it. And you know, so there were these two instances that came up this last month involving these people sent off to El Salvador that brought this to my mind. Okay. And two contexts of it. Okay. First of all, they took these gang members and they sent them to El Salvador. They were Venezuelans. They weren't El Salvadorians. So the White House says, well, they're gang members. And the Fox, you know, they're gang members. And so a lot of the MAGA people, a lot of Americans, well, okay, they're gang members. So, you know, but, you know, as was quickly pointed out, it's irrelevant whether they were gang members or murderers or whatever, because due process says you can't be sent to El Salvador. You can't take somebody, even a convicted criminal, cannot be sent to some foreign gulag. They can't be, even if they're guilty. And so it was a violation of due process. Now, they could have, there is a deportation process to send them back to Venezuela. They could have done that. But there's no way to send them to some you know, and so people just said, oh, okay. And this was disturbing to me to see such a fundamental, and the court said, don't do it. And that was the other thing, you know, the separation of powers. We have a judiciary. And, you know, this Montesquieu, this famous French guy, came up with this thing. Our founding fathers adopted it, put it in our Constitution, separating powers. So to avoid oppression of people and dictator, they have the executive, the judicial, and the legislature, three different things. And the judiciary gets to say what the law is. The judiciary said, no, you can't do it. They did it anyway. So the other example was this Garcia guy. We're all familiar with that. So I think you're paying attention to the news. And they swept this guy up, father of three, never been no evidence he's ever a gang member, and they admitted it was a mistake, and they sent him off to El Salvador and threw him in jail. And so then the White House says, well, he was a gang member. But the interesting thing was that unlike the others, okay, there's no evidence of that. He was never charged with anything, you know, so they scrounge up some anonymous hearsay declaration of somebody who was in a gang that was far from where he ever lived. And the judge just mocked it. It was just preposterous. There's nothing there. And of course, they didn't produce the guy. They never charged him with anything. He never was given any due process whatsoever. They never accused him of this. They just swept him away. And so this is all brought up to people. And so the White House says, well, he was a gang member. But nobody says, wait a minute. Says who? I mean, this should have been an instance of outrage. Everybody, wait a minute. You can't just make up something. You can't just grab somebody off the street and say, oh, he's a murderer. And why? Because this person over here filed an anonymous hearsay declaration somewhere, which we haven't seen, and he hasn't been under oath. And he said A, B, and C. Well, obviously, we just decided that's true. And so this whole concept of due process is just profoundly ignored. And this is one of our great heritages, this heritage of civilization, but particularly American, you know, justice. This is what is the foundation. Without that, there is no justice. We have 1984, we have a dictatorship, or just people can be, and that's what happens in these countries. People are just swept up, they knock on the door, they come and they grab them and they throw them in prison someplace. And that's what Putin does and what Xi does if you do something. Putin sometimes just kills people. And or he just takes them and throws them in the gulag ever since the czars out in Siberia, and they kill them or they torture them. They just leave them locked up someplace, and they have no recourse. This is not America. Okay, we're not supposed to be like that. And until recently, everyone would have risen up, and I'm reminded of the Watergate hearings. Remember that, when it was
Sure.
1974. You have to be an old geezer like me to remember these things. But I watched it on TV. I was out mountain climbing in Wyoming and in the Tetons, and it was playing in a bar. I went in there and watched it. And what was striking about it was the tremendous degree of respect that the Republicans and the Democrats showed each other, and the respect to the process of law and how they followed everything and when it was discovered that Nixon had done this and that, the arch conservative guy Goldwater storms into the White House, into the Oval Office, says, "Get out, because you're a criminal. You broke the law." And can you imagine that? I mean, it's a different world today.
Well, Robert, to stop you just for a minute to reemphasize what you're saying is that now you have people like J.D. Vance coming out and saying, well, the court could come out with that opinion and it goes against us, but just ignore the court. What are you going to do? And within the last 2 or 3 days, and then you have the way that the Trump organization is reframing it is that they always come up with this, well, 70 some odd million of people elected us to do this job. And even he says it all the time. I was given the task to do this job, not the courts. And he reframes it back to his being a dictatorship, and that's okay. And even his PR person, who is comes out very strongly, and she says last week, well, without question, the president has an agenda. He's the one that is laying down the law, and there is no reason for any court to interfere with what he has to say. Now, I'm paraphrasing what she said in front of the press, but that's basically just, you have three people saying, ignore the courts. What are they going to do? And that is where that third rail has been touched and polished. And, I mean, we are there.
Well, scholars have called this the constitutional crisis, and Trump has said he respects the Supreme Court and he will obey them. We will see. He said, "I don't respect the district courts, and I'm not going to obey the courts," and which is a profound violation of separation of powers. But to have one of the fundamental first things that all dictators do is they get rid of the courts. And they ignore the courts, because especially the independence of the courts. Because if you can ignore the courts, you can just grab people off the street and throw them in jail. That's what he's really basically saying he has. And so the notion that the president, can decide because he has this authority, he can ignore the courts, is not constitutional. The Constitution says the courts make the law. They decide what the law is. They decide what the boundaries of presidential authority and power are. And they have repeatedly throughout history come in and said, they started out with Marbury versus Madison in 1803, and they said that Congress can't do this. And they struck down a law that Congress made. Congress was the most powerful of the branches back then. He said, no, you can't do it. It's unconstitutional. Congress went along with it. And ever since then, they have repeatedly come in from time to time and said, no. Truman seized the steel mills during the Korean War because they were going to threaten the war effort. And the courts came and said, give it back. You can't do that. And he gave it back. And so ever since Nixon with the tape says, I'm the president, what the president do can't, the president gets to decide this, what the president can't be wrong, because I'm the president. And the Supreme Court says, no, that's not true. Give them the tapes. Unanimously, he did. And so up until this point, there have been numerous instances where the judiciary, where the executive would say, we get to do this. And the Supreme Court said, no, you don't get to do that. It's illegal. We decide what you get to do, and you can't, and stop it. And they have always abided by it, and that's maintained our constitutional democracy. And so it's horrifying to hear, once again from the Trump administration that, this history, this precedent, the Constitution itself doesn't say what it says it says. It doesn't say what the Supreme Court says it says. It just, they get to decide. That's basically saying that he's Putin. He gets to
Oh yeah.
decide what he's going to do. So there has to be, and what's disturbing, and it's what, this segment, set me off is that, there isn't this, as there was in Watergate, when Nixon started saying, well, I'm the president, and if the president do it can't be illegal, Republicans leaped out of their chairs to say, no, just because you say it doesn't make it legal. The courts, and so there was such a respect for due process and such a respect for the separation of powers then. And now it's just ignorance, and there's people thinking, oh, it's, and so that is very, very disturbing to me. So,
and to interject, and I can't remember the name of the individual it was last week, but what he said was, he was asked, when does the third rail get hit? As far as this constitutional crisis, how is that measured? And he said it's already been hit. It's already been touched, because when you have people thinking, about how they can go around and ignore the Constitution and ignore the law of the land and try to find a way to make it somehow logically reasonable, that third rail has already been touched. The constitutional crisis is already here. Now, whether you want to measure it in an experience coming out of the courts, that's one thing, but to have a group of people form a cabal to sit and say, well, we're just going to ignore it. And not only that, Trump took it one thing. They asked him, well, would you consider sending Americans, that to a gulag, a prison down in El Salvador? And he wished he could. Well,
yes.
if you're going to put the hood over one guy that has 3 kids, part of a trade union, nothing on his background that says he's been arrested for anything, and basically put on a plane and shipped overseas, and now a president who somehow internally thought he had the power to take over Canada or end the war in Ukraine in the first day, or get the price of eggs to go down magically, or the price of gas to go down magically, can't pick up the phone call and call El Salvador, the same guy that was going to take over Panama down in the local region or take over Greenland, but somehow is powerless to make a phone call and say to this dictator in El Salvador, hey, send this guy back. There might be
we're paying this guy.
Yeah, send him back.
Contract. It's like you're housing them in your hotel, and we're paying for it. And the idea that there he is sitting in the Oval Office, surrounded by the cabinet and the president. All they had to do was say, "Would you please send this? Don't send him back. We'll send, one of our jets over to pick him up."
Yeah.
And the next, and they never ask that. They never facilitate it. So 2 district courts have said, that he's violated their order, and he openly. So this is how the constitutional crisis has unfolded. It starts with the district court, and both of them have set hearings on contempt, criminal contempt against the administration. So we're going to see that this thing is teeing up for this epic confrontation between the courts, and that's going to go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will ultimately have in its hands. And the Supreme Court unanimously, and it's just very interesting because it's so extremely conservative, and there's 6 of them. They all of them said that those kids that were those men that were sent to El Salvador, the gang members, they were all entitled to due process, and they weren't given it. And so nobody can be sent anywhere or done anything to unless they get due process. They all said that, and they didn't get due process. So we're now setting this thing up, and both those district courts have done brilliant jobs. And Boasberg just did this 46-page order, and they're really teeing it up. They've seen this coming, and they're teeing it up, and all this evidence that the administration does absolutely nothing to facilitate getting the back, which they could have done but didn't do, and it's teeing it up for the contempt hearing, which will end up in going to the court, going to the Supreme Court. And so we're going to have this fight, and my guess is that Trump will blink, as he has several times in these recent weeks, where he does something and there's an outrage that pours up. I mean, he put these huge tariffs on electronics, and Apple went to him and said, "Wait a minute, we gave you millions of dollars in campaign contribution, Cook." Send $1 million to your inauguration, slush fund, and so he backs off. Okay, we're taking off the electronics, and he's backed off. He's coming. So they're looking around, and when there's enough pushback, they did that with some of the farm stuff. So this is a play. Something in motion here, and my guess is that there is no principle at stake here in terms of taking that innocent guy with the kids and sending what principle of law or how is this going to make America? What's it do with the price of eggs? It's got nothing to do with nothing. It's just an arbitrary cruelty, which is something that they seem to love and get off
They
on.
just they love to be cruel. I mean, that is the bottom, the thread that runs through the silence of the Republican Senate and the silence of the Republican Congressman.
Yes.
They have to have
The separation of the families. Remember last time they separate all and they 450 kids never could find their parents, because they didn't keep records and sent them off. And so cruelty is the whole purpose of a lot of this. And but anyway, it's coming. When he defines constitutional crisis, when he defies the district court, or when he defies the contempt proceeding, or when he defies the Supreme Court, but it's coming, it's keying up. And my guess is that he will, till he made his point to the MAGA, his audience, and he will say, "Look, you see where I'm coming from here, but these court, I have to go along, and they are conservative, so we'll just," and he will find some way to he'll have the Salvadorian president send the guy back, and he'll say, "Well, he's out of my hands," and moot the whole thing. So I think something like that's in the works here.
To just shift, you mentioned tariffs. There's a blurb today. One of the MAGA dairy farmers up in Maine just got a bill for $18,000 on a tariff charge for things that he ordered from Canada.
Yes.
And unfortunately, he tells, "Well, I can't raise the price of my milk because I'm in this consortium milk, arena here in my own area. I can't raise the prices there. There's nothing I could do. And by the way, why isn't Canada paying this? I'm not supposed to pay this tariff. This bill came to me, $18,000.
The extreme economic illiteracy of Americans, so we don't understand that a tariff is just a tax on the consumer and nothing more than that.
Yeah.
I could do 3 pods on the tariff idiocy.
Well, it just happened to hit today where this guy came out complaining, and just like a buffoon saying, "Wait a minute, this isn't the way it's supposed to be." Oh no, it's been explained. The problem is you'd have to turn off Fox to have to get
to be, and what he's showing is that he doesn't understand what a tariff is, and nor does anybody, and no one's challenging. I mean, he's surrounded this time by sycophants who say, "Oh, brilliant, fifth, 5-dimensional chassis, part of the deal, blah blah blah." And while he just keeps walking back and doing these things that blow up in his face and backs away from him. And so let me go next to throw out some more things. I'm going to just put out some more interesting stuff for people to think about.
Sure.
And this one is kind of broad. It goes way back. And, there's a lot of unhappiness in America today. We all know that,
Right.
people are dismal about their future, and they're angry, and they don't think things are fair, and they're not. And there was a long time in which America was the land of opportunity. I mean, in the whole world, people came here, and you could get rich, and a lot of people did. It was all merit. If you worked hard, and you could make it here, and that was not the case in the rest of the world. In England, it depended on who your parents were and whether you were aristocracy, but in America, it didn't, But in the last 30 to 40 years, America has seized up, and we're no longer the land of opportunity at all. And in fact, today, if you were born in the bottom 20%, of the United States in terms of income, your parents are the bottom 20%, your chances of rising to be a member of the top 20% are less than the same chances of a British born son in England or, in Great Britain doing the same thing. And we mocked them for years as a very model of a calcified, class-ridden society where people didn't have opportunity. Today, there's more opportunity in Britain than there is here. Okay.
Yeah.
And and so a lot of this has to do with college and access to college. In 1940, only 5% of the American workforce had a college degree. I mean, college is a new thing. You mean universal college. I mean, rich kids went to college but having it as a condition of employment and as a way to get ahead in the world is new. And by the 1960, still only just over half of the CEOs in the United States had a college degree. People worked up the ranks. Now you can imagine it's getting toward universal. But while this is going on, the upper 1/3 of the American earners, workers, have watched their net income soar. I mean, the top 1% just exploded in the last 10, 20 years, while the income of the bottom 2/3 has stagnated or in some cases gone down. And so people in the bottom 2/3 are seeing that they're getting screwed over, that they're not participating in this vast wealth that's being generated and enjoyed by the upper third, and particularly by the top 1 or 2%. And they're seeing all these billionaires, but where's their share? They're not getting their share. So what you're seeing is a huge amount of anger from this. And I think it's just fueling a lot of the Trump thing. It's a lot of MAGA, and they're looking around for people to blame. And there's this elites and the coastal elites and liberals and universities, become these, subjects of antagonism. And this chasm of inequality continues to grow. And so I look at this and well, how did this happen? And as you know today, in Harvard in 1930s, there was a president of Harvard who started the whole meritocracy thing. He said at that point, to get into Harvard, it was just who your parents were, and would you give a legacy or something? And so he said, no, because more people started applying to Harvard than they had spots. So he said, well, we're going to start looking at your grades and stuff. And they began to base it on, quote, merit. So he's the guy blamed today for creating the meritocracy. It grew, the other Ivies immediately copied this. And it grew over the years, and then you had the test, the Scholastic Aptitude Test, which is a way of trying to equalize the grade system, which was a little different in place to place, and you could get some objective thing. So gradually, colleges throughout the United States shifted into this so-called meritocracy, where they started allowing people to measure who gets to go to college by grades and test scores. Okay, and that became universal. And what's interesting about it is that these test scores, is what we give the keys to the kingdom. This is how we decide our leaders. This is how we decide who gets the grants, who makes the money, who makes the decisions, who runs society. Is test scores. Who's good at taking tests? Who's good at getting grades? Among other things. Okay, there is no criteria in college admissions for good values or kindness or empathy or clarity or charity or creativity. And so what you have is this narrow, sometimes cruel, mono-valued people are put in charge of our society, and they get, and the values they have and what they may not be aligned with what's best for our society. And these are the people who have influence and who and they're just the test takers and the grade getters, and not the leaders, not the visionaries, not even necessarily likable or decent people. Is this the kind of people we want to rule our society? And if you take this on and who has suffered from this most are the poor and the people who have parents are uneducated. And you can see how this becomes something that's inherited. And if you would imagine a foot race, I think this is the best analogy. You're going to have a foot race, and we're going to have two groups of people. We're going to have runners whose kids running in this race, whose parents were marathoners and accomplished, trained people, and they're going to have professional trainers, and they're going to eat a special diet, and they're going to prepare for this, and then they're going to run against kids that never exercise, whose parents have never run, and get no exercise themselves. They never exercise for months, and they don't eat junk food, and so they're going to put them together and have a race. Who do you think is going to win that? Okay, this is an analogy to what we have today in terms of deciding who gets it into college and who gets to make the money and who gets success in our society. And there's another couple of factors that are thrown into this that are very interesting, and that is that it's long been known that parents who make a lot of money and who are highly educated tend to be higher IQs. And they tend to go be segregated into these, and they meet each other and they marry each other, and they have kids that have higher IQs. And they provide the stimulating environment for their kids, school tutors, good schools. They read to them books to them at night. They send them out to all these cultural activities, intellectually stimulating stuff, and help them with their homework. And the poor people don't do that. And so what we have is a self-perpetuating thing, and some of it's inherent. And there's been all these studies done by economists that I think are utterly fascinating, that they have this concept they call the realization rate. Now, they earlier determined that, that societies that have a diversity, that is to say, if you have Black people and white people and Asian and, all, Hispanic, and they're all women and men and different religions, all together, working together, the society is more successful, it's more creative, it's more fair, it's more productive, interestingly. And so they came up with this idea of the realization rate. And the realization rate is, you take a poor Black kid in a ghetto whose parents are uneducated and maybe his dad's in jail, and the way that society allocates opportunity, if this kid, what is the chances that this kid can say he's a brilliant kid, he gets great scores, he's brilliant, he's a genius. What is the chance that he can realize that and grow to be in the top 20%, or can go to a good school and utilize his talents, his inherent talents? That's the realization rate. And if it's 50%, that means that those kind of kids, with all that talent, have a 50% chance of realizing their potentials. And the realization rate is directly correlated with the success of society. And so our realization rate today is getting lower and lower and lower. And it's a harbinger of future. It's a leading indicator of the decline of American civilization and American success. And if we can punch that back up, and there are ways we can do it. Affirmative action was one of them. But there's a lot of other ways we can try to get around the racial constitutional problems of affirmative action, and come up with ways of making it race blind, and maybe just make it economic, and find ways to create opportunities so that we can raise the realization rate. And raising the realization rate will solve these other problems that we talked about with who gets to go to college. And then maybe that we can figure out ways, I'm sure we can, if we put our minds to it, we can find ways to add kindness and empathy and creativity and other good values into the mix that decides who gets to go to Harvard. And because who gets to go to Harvard runs the world. And we can add those things, and we can change the inequity and the stagnant, narrow monoculture values that are now dominating and creating this inequity. And this will, in the end, result in a society in which, as it started out originally, where anybody without a college degree, the joke today in San Francisco is you have to have a master's degree to mop the floor. And so this would change this so that those bottom kids could once again have a chance of getting at the top. And you wouldn't have this gap of that's causing all the anger of the bottom 2/3 stagnant. They're not going to put up with it. They're striking back. They have the burn it all down attitude. This is what's causing it. We can fix it. If everybody in the bottom two-thirds thought, well, I have a chance, my kid has a chance, maybe I don't, but my kids have a chance, and here's how they can do it, then it would mitigate that sense of injustice, that just an anger that permeates the bottom two-thirds. Okay, so that's something for us to think about. Now, how exactly we go about doing that is going to be a challenge, but there's ways to do it. It can be done. This is the meritocracy fixed the idea that the people who went to Harvard were just people with good with wealthy, influential parents. That's what got you in or not. Nothing else. And we can fix that. The president Connaught fixed that in the 1930s. It became the model. We can tweak that model to promote people who are decent and give the bottom two-thirds a chance to come in the top 20%. And that will fix American society. Okay. So that's that opportunity. Now I want to, finish up with one last little tidbit.
Well, we have about 4 minutes, and
I will do this in 4 minutes.
Okay. I'm sorry to put you under everybody. I know things you're about to believe that just ain't true. And I told Robert when we started, we're going into a new phase that we're getting our shows lined up so that other outlets like to have our 45-minute segments because they like to do things in between, like provide commercials and advertising and things like that. So, Robert, I saved you 5 minutes. So I've got, you get an extra one. So okay. Go.
So I want to talk about, in the front page of the New York Times last week, there was this letter that the Trump administration, several people in the government had sent to Harvard. And they had said, here's what you have to do to satisfy us.
Right.
And what they asked Harvard to do was so extraordinarily crackpot and bizarre. I mean, they basically wanted to say you have to turn yourself into a government agency under the control of President Trump. You have to admit who we want you to admit. You have to admit the students and professors. You have to give up all independence and turn yourself into this mega, factory without, and one of the interesting things, and so Harvard had no choice. I mean, they had no choice but to say, stick it in your ear, we're not going to do it. See you in court, which they did. And they were trying to, and if they come up with any kind of rational thing, they might have worked. There were Harvard was actually active negotiations with the administration, several people there to try to, the anti-Semitism stuff and some of that. There were a lot they could do, and they were negotiating to try to be reasonable and fix things. And they said, we're not perfect. We can, but this came in and it just blew it all out. So one of the interesting things they came up with, which we'll just touch on, one of the interesting things they came up with is they demanded viewpoint diversity. I've heard this now coming from various people in the whole conservative movement. They see universities as liberal bastions and so forth. And so they have demanded, quote, viewpoint diversity. This is a fascinating concept, and it's really become part of the whole Project 2025 view of how we're going to change American universities and how we're going to change American society by requiring universities and research and to have this viewpoint diversity. Okay, what does viewpoint diversity mean? In some ways, it might be healthy if we could get people together in different points of view and listen to each other. But the way it's being portrayed and what is, it is what they want people in science who don't believe in science. They want to put somebody in charge of Health and Human Services, like Brandon Warren Bobby, who says that autism is caused by, even though there's dozens of studies that show autism is not caused by vaccines, there's no evidence of it whatsoever. And and so you take this and multiply it throughout society. What climate change? John Tyndall, 1859, Irish physicist, came up with the volcanoes put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Plants and trees take it out, sequester it under the ground. That's climate change. A third grader can understand it. And so Trump and these, it ain't so. We want people want the viewpoint diversity. We want people who believe that climate change is a hoax. Well, it's been science for they've got it to 6 decimals about, and they measure it in Mauna Loa, with this up on the volcano.
Right.
They have a wide thing and they measure the carbon dioxide. It's gone up 25% since 1957 and is surging up now because we got cars in India and China. Yeah. So, how is it possible that you can have such a thing as viewpoint diversity and disregard truth? Where is reason and evidence, and how is it compatible with the idea of viewpoint diversity? This is something we're going to have this debate in the coming months and years with the conservatives, saying that we want view, and what they really mean is they want people to believe things that ain't so, and for
Well,
which
there
there's
you go.
evidence that they're not so, and they're not willing to look at evidence. And we're back to Galileo with his telescope, with them saying, it ain't so, that Mercury and Venus are not going. We don't care that they're going. We don't care what you can see there. The sun goes around the earth. That the scripture says so. Trump says it's a hoax, so we're done with it. So what we're going to have, and we perhaps discuss this, and if you stay tuned with us and come back for our next podcast, we will talk about more of these kind of fascinating challenges ahead for American society, and how we're going to keep our sanity, and how we're going to keep, moving towards solutions to the big problems that we've got, including climate change, and how we can do it in some rational way. And we will provide you with some answers for that. So we look forward to having you join us.
Well, I thank you again, Robert, for a wonderful, eye-opening experience today. I was fascinated. Hope everybody else was. It seems right there at the end, we're painting a picture that if we allowed the Trump version of going and creating the Harvard syllabus, we'd look something like North Korea, where we would have whatever he wants to preach. And if you go against it, you and your family will no longer be in that crowd, in that ensemble of people, because North Korea, they are not allowed to think either. So you are getting us to think, Robert. We really appreciate you taking the time to put all this together. It was a huge bite of reality, which we hope everybody appreciates. And things people believe that just ain't so. We know you're sorting them out week to week, and we wish you well in all your trips. Be safe and healthy out there with you and your wife and your daughter and grandchildren that you're taking along. And I wish you well, and stay in touch.
Thank you, Grant. Look forward to our next visit together.
Oh, it's going to be fun. But things people believe that just ain't so, they're coming out every day, and we're keeping notes. And while you're gone, I keep them every day, and I know you do too. So we'll have some fun when you return again. This is Randy Weckerly for Robert Mills for Things You Believe That Just Ain't So, and it's on the Distillery Channel Media, LLC. And you can find productions like this in our podcast on almost any channel that you would within the next day or so when we get it up in terms of podcast form, or you can go to Roku, our Live Eco Style channel. Robert has his own channel within our channel called Things People Believe That Just Ain't So, or you can go directly to liveecostyle.com. Right there on our front page in the upper left-hand corner will always be the latest renditions of all the shows that we're doing. And remember, on April 22nd, Tuesday, it is Earth Day, and we're going to be reemphasizing through our Live Eco Style, our Global Eco Traveling Eco Certification, 10th anniversary of having that in place, and showing how businesses, people, and destinations can, through a very easy process, become eco-certified with us, and at least have a question and answer understanding of what they're doing to make the good world better. And it's like my grandfather said, as you enter and leave the beach, always leave a better footprint. So, Robert, thank you much once again. This is Randy. I look forward to talking to you.
Randy, looking forward to the next one.
All right, thanks, Robert. Bye-bye.